I feel an urgency for the 24-25 school year for our secondary students. If we are not, at least in the high school level, getting some AI literacy to our students and getting them some opportunities to work with AI as well as learn about it, work with it in increasingly complex ways, then we're going to send them out into the world, not being competitive with others who have had that experience.
Today, I had the opportunity to interview Vera Cubero. Vera led the development of the North Carolina K-12 education guidance, one of the most forward-looking guidance reports I've seen. It was a fascinating discussion with Vera, and I really enjoyed listening to her discuss the urgency of both integrating instruction with and about artificial intelligence.
66% said they would not hire somebody without AI skills. And so, I mean, we really have an imperative, I feel like.
And Vera's approach is not just about artificial intelligence. She stresses the importance of project-based learning and a move away from summative assessment. This is an opportunity to hear it from Vera in her own words. I'm very excited to have her today. North Carolina was, not only one of the first states to issue an AI guidance policy for schools, but like in my mind, was really the best, like right out of the gate for some reasons that we'll talk about. Before we get into that, though, I just kind of wondered, how did you get started in education? Like, how did you end up there?
Well, I was kind of a late starter. I graduated at 27, had a little untraditional path. But my first role was actually as a teacher assistant in elementary school. I graduated with a high school English teaching certificate, but I had small children at the time and just it worked well for me. So I did the teacher assistant role and writing coach for a couple of years. And then I took a job in middle school teaching English in middle school, English language arts. And I added a social studies certificate. And I just ended up really liking middle school. And so I added that license and I spent all of my teaching years in middle school. So I spent 14 years teaching in middle school. And then about 2008, I'd just seen so much advancement in technology and how it was affecting my classroom. And, I kind of predicted that we would come to a place where we are now, where it's really infused a lot more in education. And so I started a program to get my instructional technology facilitator license add-on, and I finished that in 2010. And then a couple of years later, our district did add those positions. So I filled one of those positions at the school level first and then moved into the district level. So I served all schools K-12. I did that for about 7 years. And then in 2020, right smack in the middle of the pandemic, I ended up taking this job as a Western Region digital teaching and learning consultant for the Department of Public Instruction. So a long career of about 28 years in now in education, just done a variety of things from the school to district to state level now. So.
Well, that brings a lot of context, to the job you're doing now and the role that you have, because as I think I want to talk about, this is having a lot of implications, really just kind of beyond what you might think of, kind of a lot of like technological implementation in schools. But you mentioned kind of in 2020, you started this role. I think you said the fall of 2020, and then of course the fall of 2022, late 2022, we have ChatGPT, which really brings AI and generative AI like kind of right into the public consciousness and right into schools, right? You couldn't really write a paper with the previous versions of ChatGPT unless you wanted to get an F. But this you could write a paper, pretty effectively, and it came right into the schools. And so how did you start seeing that impact the schools? And is that what led to really your involvement with AI in schools?
Okay, well, I had already gotten interested in AI as a ITF at the county level. I think it was 2018 when ISTE offered a class called AI in Education, something like that. It was a university level class. And I got permission to take the course. It was a graduate level course. It was pretty involved. And just really exploring AI was very interesting. But at the time, of course, it wasn't really feasible for the mainstream classroom because of the permissions and then also, I mean, the chatbots were awful. I mean, they were just very frustrating and so I'd kind of had that lens and was already interested in it. And then, of course, ChatGPT hit me out of the blue, like a lot of people that weren't really following it that closely. But as soon as it came out, I jumped in and started exploring it. And of course, at first, not knowing what I was doing, was using it more like Google, which didn't work very well, but very quickly started learning some tricks to kind of use it in a way that could really be helpful. And it was obvious very quickly that it was going to have a huge impact on both teaching and learning and education in general. And so I just started digging in more and more and started creating some resources that I could use for training, because that's a big part of our role in digital teaching and learning is we do staff development, professional development for educators. And then that summer we do a roadshow every summer for two weeks called the NC Bold, and we go to every region in our state, and it's mainly teacher centric. And so I did sessions there, 4 sessions a day, 8 days in a row, so a lot of sessions on just how teachers could use it to save themselves time, and they were extremely well attended and well received. The teachers were very quick when you can show them really quickly how much time it can save them. They were very interested in it, and so it just kind of built from there. I just kept creating resources, trying to stay up to date on it, and sharing things out as I found them. And then, that fall, as I was going around talking to teachers, kind of realizing how different the guidance was across the state. Some districts had blocked everything, even for teachers, and it was just taboo completely to use it at all. Some districts have kind of left it open for teachers, blocked for students. Some left it open for everybody, but very few were really providing good quality professional development and training on how to use it. And so I came to our leadership and told them that we really needed guidance from the state level. And so we started that committee and started the process then. That might have been more than you asked, but
No, and my first interaction with it, using it, I kind of had the first, the similar impression. Well, this is really going to change, everything that I do. And I'm not a regular teacher. I just, I coach the debate team and I train debaters. So it's a little different than, a regular classroom environment. But I thought even, from students for speeches, to how they prepare for debates and maybe even using it in the debate, it's really going to change everything. And then, of course, I've been in education in different ways for 30 years. I thought was really going to impact, all the assignments and all the type of work that I do. Before I get into kind of some of the details of, the North Carolina guidance, I think one thing that's kind of become or is coming out, right, and really came out in your guidance. This is about a lot more than just kind of teaching teachers how to use a technological tool like, Quizlet or some other applications. If they have Google Classroom, you're training them on Google Classroom. This is really kind of in some ways, what some people might call like instructional redesign. And I saw a little bit of that, come out in your document. And that's why I was first drawn so much to your guidance, not just because it was one of the original guidance documents, but because you bring up a lot of, other ways that students need to learn to prepare in, this AI world. I know you mentioned debate, which, as I just said, is my background. So that attracted me to that. I wonder if you could kind of address, at a broader level when you're looking at this guidance, what you're trying to accomplish with it, beyond just like, here are some ways that teachers could use it in the classroom and some benefits to that, which are, of course, really strong. You mentioned it saves them a lot of time and they really enjoy it. But beyond that, in terms of our overall, like how we're going to teach students to prepare for this world, what are some of your thoughts on that?
well, I think that is probably our biggest challenge right now is just kind of changing mindsets in education and trying to just I mean, we really do need a whole redesign from the ground up, in my opinion, in education. It's been largely the same for close to 30 years. In most places, I know there are pockets of innovation, but in most places, we're still in a position where kids are just kind of fed information and then expected to regurgitate it on tests. And they're sitting, in rows or tables or whatever. But a lot of times the teacher is kind of the purveyor of information and they just absorb it. And that just doesn't work for students in the world that we live in now. And so trying to kind of redesign education has been something it's talked about for a long time. Like we need to really enhance critical thinking. We need to do more workforce development, prepare students for the future. But I think that AI is going to force those changes because I don't think teachers will ever be not needed, but schools are going to have to incorporate these things in order to stay relevant because really a student could, if they chose, learn about anything they want to. And we need to make sure that schools are helping to be an impetus to that, not holding them back, because in that case, a lot of people are going to make choices to go elsewhere. And so that was a big part of our guidance as well, is trying to help people to kind of rethink what the classroom might look like, and we need to actually update again, because there have been a lot of things that happened since then. But I think we really have to just dissect it and see what parts work well and what parts even curriculum. I mean, that's something that takes a long time. But some of our curriculum may not really serve students in the future they're going into, and our testing models, our the way that we evaluate students is not really potentially going to serve them well in the world that they're going into. So I think this kind of starting the process of rethinking all of that and thinking of how the classroom might be different and how it might better serve the needs of our students in the future they're going into.
Now you bring a lot of experience, as you talked about, at the beginning, starting as an aide, then, a classroom teacher, then taking on like an instructional role, then an instructional leadership role. And, you've been working now, within the department, you have your own leadership, obviously has been established in this area. You've been connecting with a lot of people, kind of at a broad level. What do you think like it might take, right, to really kind of institute that type of change? I think back to some research I was doing, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a committee of 10. The committee of 10 included who at that time was the Secretary of Education, a leading professor at Harvard University, and they really kind of instituted, some of the changes, some of the educational models that we still see today. People call it the industrial model, and sometimes I think it's a little bit unfairly criticized because they were trying to bring equity to education, but also, to prepare people for the world at that time. But it took a lot of leadership, at the federal level. And I wonder what type of leadership you think might be required. I noticed your own, Secretary of Education. She's very involved with this. I saw her at a panel, at GSV. We see people like Pat Youngprit. We've done work at designing schools, of course, Ms. Bickerstaff, right, who you've been working with. There are a lot of people kind of emerging. In California, we're working with a superintendent from Santa Ana Unified School District who just produced their own very forward-looking guidance. And I'm just kind of wondering what type of leadership do you think will take to kind of institute these types of changes beyond these pockets that we're seeing?
Well, I think in our state in particular, you mentioned Superintendent Truitt, and she has done a tremendous job of bringing workforce development to the forefront of education. And I think that we need that kind of lens. She is, and all of those other people you've mentioned also, have a lot, but her work, especially with creating our portrait of the graduate, and we kind of align everything with that because, having the vision to kind of look into the future and make good, solid predictions about what our students are going to need is really, really important. And so I think you probably saw she was on a panel just recently with code.org and OpenAI and several other people, but she made a statement then that infusing AI into the education experience in K-12 is workforce development. And I think that is true. And so we need that kind of lens, but also the people like Pat Youngpratt with TJI and Amanda Bickerstaff, all of those names that you mentioned have kind of become leaders in the space also in K-12 education. I'll have that same kind of perspective of making sure that it's done responsibly, but giving students all of those experience. The equity piece is huge for us as well. Making sure that all students have access, and that's where K-12 education comes into the field, because some of our students are just not going to have those experiences if they're not getting at school. They're not going to have the devices, the connection. They're not going to have the high quality training. And so I think that's one of our primary roles as well. I was happy to see that there's a new bill before Congress. And I was trying to remember what the name of it, what the leaders were just this week, just a couple days ago.
I saw that, right?
A National Science Foundation was, I think, mentioned in it, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but the Senate bill, but week before, was kind of disappointing because it had basically nothing about education in it. And I think that any legislation or any leadership that is making guidelines or any kind of legislation about AI that doesn't really have a heavy focus on the K-12 space is missing the point. And so that bill came out and it was much more targeted. It talked about, creating some opportunities for teachers to work with the National Science Foundation and some pilot programs and things like that. So I think that kind of leadership, people that have that in mind. There's also an AI literacy initiative that's been tossed about. I don't think it's been passed yet, but I think it's really important that we make sure that all of our students are getting the AI literacy piece as well. And so all of those people, all of those things have worked together. Um, Legislation is kind of slow though, and that's kind of where I have concerns is that I don't think we can wait for legislative processes to take place. I feel a real urgency to get things. I feel an urgency for the 24-25 school year for our secondary students. If we are not, at least in the high school level, getting some AI literacy to our students and getting them some opportunities to work with AI as well as learn about it, work with it in increasingly complex ways, then we're going to send them out into the world, not being competitive with others who have had that experience.
Yeah, and I really like, how you mentioned tying it to, what the workforce development, what types of skills are students going to need into the future, tying that into your graduate profile. I'm sure your graduate profile is tied into the skills of the future, but I
Mhm.
found that, in working with Santa Ana, that once you tie it to the graduate profile, to the objectives of the district, right, or broader objectives, it's easier to get buy-in, right?
Mhm.
Because, I'm sure, as you're aware, not all teachers or, school administrators are supportive of, integration of AI, and, some are coming along and removing them direction. But I think tying it to those objectives and showing how supporting, teacher and student AI literacy at a minimum, can help advance the cause of building support for AI integration in schools. Now, in terms of the North Carolina guidance, we just mentioned tying it to the graduate profile. But if you had to identify maybe like, the North Star, right? Of the guidance, like what's the overall goal? And a couple maybe other kind of key points, right? It's a very well developed guidance, right? Like I say, that kind of initially kind of laid out like some of the core objectives in terms of AI literacy and building awareness, and then some support for instructional redesign. And I saw in the newest version, you had a lot on implementation, which I thought was, at first some of the guidance as well. Listen, they were more like established, they were goals, right? Or principles, which helped guide people, but you've added a lot of kind of implementation recommendations. So I'm wondering if you could like comment on some of the North Stars of the AI, North Carolina AI guidance, and some of the things you're doing beyond kind of training the teachers to advance implementation.
Okay. Well, I would say if we had to identify a North Star, it would be the responsible piece, the responsible implementation, because it is something, we have the fear camps and then we have the hype camps. And we want to not fall in either one of those. We want to recognize the power that it has in education, but also we have to recognize and we have to educate people about the limitations and the concerns, like data privacy concerns is huge for us. Making sure that people who use it, and I like to say, people, I say students, but everyone should learn about AI before they learn with it. Because if you don't understand how it works, how these tools work, then you can't really comprehend why they hallucinate or why they have inaccurate responses. Sometimes you can't really comprehend that you need to be also very aware of bias and looking for bias and mitigating it. And then also the data privacy. So the responsible piece is huge for us. And I would say the other North Star is equity. And I've kind of already addressed that, but our lower socioeconomic students, we want to make sure that this is something that is inclusive of everybody, those students as well as students with disabilities who can benefit the most from the tools. We want to make sure that they're implemented in a way that is that every one of those people gets an opportunity to use it. Unfortunately, I've seen in the past with some computer science implementations, coding programs, especially in elementary levels, that it is more done in like pull out AIG groups and just kind of loosely covered for everyone else. And I feel like that is an equity issue. And I don't want to see that happen with AI. I don't want to see it that only our AIG students or our AP students are the ones that are having the opportunity to work with it and everybody else is just kind of not. Because the students that are going into the world with the most challenges, that will actually handicap them further. It'll increase that divide further. And so those would be our two North Stars, is just guiding responsible implementation and ensuring equity for all. Mhm.
Now, when you went about, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of the guidance, right? Because how the process you use can obviously impact kind of how the guidance is developed and what is in it. So I'm wondering, reflecting on those North Stars of, responsible use and equity, if you could kind of describe the process, that you led to develop the guidance and how you kept in mind those two North Stars and how the development of the guidance maybe reflects them.
Okay, well, our process was, honestly, it was just kind of something that just came about and we just worked through it. It wasn't like we had a big commission to study how to do it. I kind of brought it up to my leadership and they gave me permission in our organization. And I had also the permission of our CIO, which is Dr. Vanessa Rand, who's also on our committee. And we put together a committee and we kind of looked at the people that we would want to be sure and include. And that was data privacy. So we got our director of data privacy and our director of K-12 cybersecurity. We also wanted to tie it in with our digital learning plan, which was Dr. Ashley McBride was the one who developed that. So those folks were all on our committee. And then we found out very quickly after we started developing that there was another committee in our CT, our Career Technical Education Department, that was also working on guidelines. And so we wanted to include them anyway, but we just ended up joining forces. So they had, so we have the computer science people in there as well. And then we also wanted to at least make sure that all of the accessibility pieces were in line with what we need for our exceptional children. So we asked somebody from our exceptional children's department, a couple of those people, to give a read over and make recommendations as well. And I think that's really important. Of course, at a state level, our committee members are a little different than they would be at a district level. But at a district level, we really recommend that they, of course, all of those pieces are covered, but also they need to have teacher voices. They need to have people from various disciplines as well, because they're going to have a little bit different lens. And then they definitely need to have exceptional children involved, and then parents and students, because they're directly serving those two stakeholders. And so our guidelines, developed from that committee. And what we did is we had already developed a draft. The computer science people were just still kind of working on one. And so we presented our draft to them. They liked it. And so we kind of went with that draft. But we met a few times and kind of just made sure everybody had input into it. But with that many people working on it, we had like a lot of repetition, so I ended up being kind of the one that was, I guess, the main editor, and going through and kind of making sure we didn't have a lot of repetition and everything was kind of in the right organization, because we organized it by our digital learning plan, the 5 focus areas of that. And then originally I didn't include a lot of the kind of make and take pieces that I'd been using in training, but it just kind of had the feel of something that might only help like the leadership, the highest leadership in the district, not really practical for the people that really boots on the ground. And so we kind of tossed around the idea of adding a few things that I'd created, that I was using and seeing as being successful with in leading leadership teams and districts and teachers. And I end up adding a lot of those things, like my crafting or my prompting frameworks and my ethical frameworks and some of those things. And I think that really, it made it longer than we originally wanted it, but it made it a lot more robust and a lot more just kind of like a playbook that people could take and actually feel like they were gaining information from it.
Right. Now, and how many districts are in North Carolina?
We have about 115 actually local education agencies, which is, we call them LEAs, but we also have over 200 charters, which are also public school units. And so total, I would have to check my numbers on the total number, but I would say we are probably around 325, something like that, LEA or total public school units or PSUs,
Now, have
including.
you been, and not necessarily you personally, obviously, but has your department, and anyone, kind of in your office or your level, you may have been working with all those entities, maybe all, 300 of them. How might you describe what's kind of occurring at kind of the next level down in terms of, the local education agencies or the charters, maybe what some people are calling the districts, how would you describe kind of their progression in terms of kind of implementing some types of AI guidance or AI literacy, or even discussing these types of things?
Okay, well, we have in North Carolina, we're a local control state. And so we can't really like enforce that. That's why there are recommendations and guidelines. But I will say that after the guidelines came out, we saw a lot more movement, a lot more activity with districts, starting work on creating their own guidelines. And so we've created, which is still ongoing, an AI collaborative. And that's one of the things that we did to try to help districts, and we pulled together about 150 educators from about 85 different PSUs that applied. And they are working, some of them are charters and some are LEAs, so PSUs is kind of inclusive of both. But they're working. We also provided a lot of learning opportunities for them to kind of build leadership and to go back to their districts and then help guide the work. And so we did like a full day training, went from AI for Education. Amanda Bickerstaff came in and did a full day in-person training, just building that level setting, that AI literacy to make sure that they all understood AI very well and had kind of the same understanding. And she tied it in with our own guidelines. Of course, our guidelines are very aligned with her work anyway. And so we did that. And then we've had some guest speakers come in virtually, like Kip Glazer, which I'm sure you've
Right.
in
In
there.
California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she kind of represented Digital Promise as well as her own work. And then our own agency, we have an accessibility consultant, Donna Murray, who is very, very focused on AI and accessibility. So she came in and did some training. And in addition to the training that they're getting, they're also developing, we call them deliverables, but each person in the cohort is in a small group of job alike group that it has a facilitator, and they are working on developing deliverables, and those we're going to get in June. We haven't gotten all of those in yet, but those then we will vet them and we'll put them into a resource bank that will be available to all of our educators across the state. And so that's one thing we're trying to do to build capacity. But we also hosted 2 AI summits. We had one in the north, or one in the west, and one in the east part of our state. And those were specifically for leadership teams, working on and with a focus on policy development. And so for those, we had about 380
Wow.
participants in both of them combined. And there was a policy development workshop, and then there was also a lot of different concurrent sessions they could choose from that all kind of were with a leadership lens. And so again, helping them. So with those 2 things, and after the guidance came out, I would say that still the majority of our districts are on our guidelines. We use that roadmap we've adapted from Amanda Bickerstaff AI for Education. Level 1, which is just basically establishing guidelines and all, and level 2, which is educating the staff. Most of our districts are in between those 2 levels still now. We have a few kind of, but that's okay with us. We would rather them move slowly and responsibly than to just dive in head first. But I anticipate that in the 2024-25 school year, what I think is we're going to see a lot more people move into that level 3, which is a student in a classroom application at the secondary level. And that's and so I think that we'll be moving a lot more that way next year. We're actually collecting that data on our digital learning and media inventory, which is due at the end of June. So I'll see from every district if I'm right, but I think that's where we are. We do have a couple of high flyers that have really moved ahead and moved forward a little more quickly, but the majority of us, that's where they are now.
For, in terms of AI literacy, right, it can, include a lot of things, right? I always think of it including kind of, just at least a basic understanding of the technology and, it's kind of its emerging capabilities, how it's going to impact the world and, some ability to use at least some of the basic chatbots, right? That, now are pretty easy for really and almost anyone to use. They do need to understand, like you say, how they hallucinate, how to control for that, like how to control for the bias. So those are kind of, I think a few basic ideas of, what AI literacy could include. But, as you see schools, say, moving into that third stage, right? And at that point, you kind of, they're starting to use it. You want them to have some AI literacy. What are some things that maybe you think are essential, either just generally in AI literacy, what you'd like the teachers to know before they start working with students, or, you talked about earlier, we're going to have students graduating. So what are some things you'd like the students to know who are graduating? So if they're going to college, they're going to be prepared to, work with AI in college, right? And take advantage of that academically, or if they're going right into the workforce, that they're going to be competitive in the workforce.
Okay, well, I think for students, of course, definitely the basic AI literacy we've already talked about, understand a little bit about it, how it uses data. I think data analysis is a really important component of computer science as well, but understand algorithms. And so we have K-12 computer science standards, but it's really a lot of states don't mandate that. And I think we'll see that increasing, but they really do need a basic understanding of computing in general and algorithms, data science. And then, of course, just specifically about these generative AI tools, a little bit about how they work, the concerns and considerations. But I think moving beyond that, our students need opportunities to actually learn to work with them and learn how to use them ethically, responsibly, how to use them to supplement their own thinking, not replace it. And I think that's where a lot of the rub comes in education, is because a lot of teachers only see it as a cheating tool. They don't understand the power of how it can really help enhance your own education. And so our students need that. And in order to do that, I mean, really, this is the kind of thing that they have to actually have hands-on practice doing. You don't learn that just from somebody telling you about it. And so students need to actually have opportunities in classes using it in a way that really helps enhance their own thinking and creativity. And I've created a continuum that I'm sharing out, and recently I've revised it and started out as an AI assessment scale, and I moved it into a zero to infinity AI integration assistant or tool, to kind of help teachers to kind of make that connection pedagogically. That doesn't mean that you are not teaching your curriculum. It's just a way of integrating it into the curriculum that both teaches the curriculum, enhances critical thinking and creativity, and gives students these opportunities that they're going to need. That Microsoft study that came out a couple of weeks ago, it really even gave me more sense of urgency with this, because in that report they and I think it was pretty widespread, 3,300 or something like that respondents, 66% said they would not hire somebody without AI skills. And so I mean, we really have an imperative, I feel like, to get our students actually into the tools and using them. And of course, I always quantify that with of appropriate age. I never would suggest that happen below the age of 13. But our high schoolers in particular, I think 2024, 25, that is a call to action. I think that we really need to be. And of course, that means getting the teachers the same thing. The teachers, first of all, need to be able to use it in their own practice and use it enough to understand to encounter a hallucination or inaccuracy, to analyze it for bias, to understand how to use it themselves to enhance their own creativity before they can adequately guide students in that capacity.
Yeah, I think the teachers using it, obviously it has the benefit, like you say, of saving them time and, all these wonderful things, but that's also how they're developing AI literacy. I mean, you can talk to people about AI and explain how it works, but until you go use it, you're not really developing what you need. I reflect back sometimes to my first job, which happened a little bit by accident. Like I said, my background is in debate, and the school wanted to hire me to coach the debate team. And they offered me a variety of different teaching positions. It was a private school. They said, well, you can teach religion or social studies or, computers if you want. And I had just been doing a little playing around on my own with computers, building some web pages. So I chose the computer job. But one of the things that came with the the computer job was that every freshman at the school, they had to take computer literacy.
Mhm.
And this was in the late 90s. Now, I'm sure that class doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure every kid who now enters high school, right, has probably some basic background in kind of using a computer and understanding how a computer works. So it's probably not something that carried on forever. And I bring this up because earlier you said, like there's computer science classes and students were learning some of these things. And maybe some of these things are learning and, in the computer science class now, and those teachers are maybe a little bit comfortable with that. But, and sometimes it's even just a pullout. But this is something we need every student, right, to understand. So I don't know if it's probably, maybe not practically possible in terms of the number, to put that, an AI literacy class, required for every ninth grader in every school, even starting in the fall of 26, that might be difficult. But I think, in terms of what you mentioned, in terms of just the teachers using the AI in the classroom, right, to help the students and for the students to understand that it's not just replacement, it's augmentation. It helps improve them. Because I don't see that the students, they will, unless they're trained differently, they're probably going to use it as replacement rather than augmentation, right? Because that's the first way that you learn how to use it. You say, well, gee, what's something that I do? Can I get AI to do it? And I think that's kind of the default, kind of training approach. But if you really teach the students and the teachers how it can be used to kind of augment and improve themselves, then I think it's going to kind of lead to a lot of change. Now,
Yeah.
in a broad picture, you say, okay, well, we're starting, stage one, stage two, we're moving into stage three a little bit. Of course, we see the technology rapidly advancing. I don't really think there's as big of a gulf because you can kind of see where it's going, right? We're kind of thinking about how to work with just intelligence generally beyond our own. But when you kind of get that question of, well, I don't really want to do this because next week everything's going to change, and everything won't change, but it will get a lot better, certainly by the fall, right? It's going to kind of change kind of quite substantially. Like we see the introduction of agents becoming more autonomous, being able to do more autonomous work and be able to do a lot more than write a paper, right? It can build presentations, it can do scientific research, all these types of things. So I'm sure that's kind of a common, thing that people say. How do you kind of address that challenge of, well, it's just changing so much, we're just going to wait?
Mhm. Well, I mean, it will change. I mean, it will
Right.
continue to change, but still, I mean, the basic tenets of it are not. I mean, the way it works, the way it's trained, those basic concerns and considerations, I don't see those changing that much. I mean, my basic AI 101 for educators course hasn't changed a lot since I was doing it a year ago. I have added a couple of things as soon as the GPTs will actually work for everybody, where I'll talk about that and kind of introduce the idea of agents. And then, of course, the conversational abilities it has now, which are phenomenal with the iOS app of ChatGPT. But the whole beginning part of it is pretty much the same. And so I say that, you've got to start somewhere. I mean, you don't not learn basic math because, there might be some I mean, they have to understand the basics before they can ever learn the advanced component. And I think that's the same in every field. And I think it's the same in AI as well. And so I really think it's important that we do that. And one other thing that I failed to mention in my long rambling answer the last time is just really the importance of media literacy too. I don't think we can overstate the importance of that students have got to understand that they're going to live in from now till forever in a world where you really don't know when you see an image or a video or an audio clip or whether it's real or AI generated. And so we've really got to, just as a tenet of democracy, to preserve our democracy, I think we need everybody as educated as we can get them about the media AI generated content and how it affects media literacy. And so I think that's a really important component as well. And again, I think it needs to be done now. I think that schools education in general did a really bad job of helping our students to contend with social media because it remained taboo, and it still is, and it was never incorporated. And in some ways I can understand because its applications in education aren't as profound. But with AI, it does have, profound implications in education as well. But I think it will have even more impact on our democracy and society than social media has.
But when I
And
look at social media and say, okay, well, it's not like a tool you'd use that much in the classroom, right? You could use it in different things, but it impacts kids' lives. And I think about the different things like we teach kids in school. And maybe the simplest one is like health class, right?
mm,
Like all these things you learn, right, as a growing up as a teenager, and they
mm,
tell you, well, don't, do this, or if you do this, then, do it in this particular way to like protect your own health. We tell kids not to smoke cigarettes. We teach kids not to use drugs, right? We teach kids to like exercise. These are not, in a sense, like the core academic subjects of like history or biology, but we have a part of education that's concerned with one's own like personal health. And I think that when you look at kind of like social media, right, and that the impact there is probably more on mental health, right? It certainly can be on physical health, right, depending on what they may get you to do or not get you to do. But I think in a lot of ways, like the social media, it should have been at a minimum, right, and included in that type of instruction. We do provide instruction for kids on all these very important things. We're very concerned about kids vaping. Schools are spending millions of dollars to implement e-hall pass systems. So, kids don't vape or spend too much time, in the classroom or spend too much time in the bathroom. So, there's lots of things that we're doing in schools to really kind of help these kids develop, personally. And I think social media, which is now just going to be hyper enabled, right, by AI, they're going to be able to basically create someone who wants to interact with you and change that interaction as you go should be like, an essential component of education. I know it's hard to get that change. And of course, you need teachers who know how to teach that and understand that, right? Or it's not going to work.
mhm,
Um, but now, like on a second thing that's kind of related to that, right? Like the teachers have to build up this understanding. One of the things I'm starting to see is a lot of just even like subject matters changing, right? So, for example, people are talking about how scientific research is going to change, that we're not even relying on hypothesis so much, that they're just taking all the data and just saying, here, AI, like figure out all the patterns, right? They're saying social science research, it should be conducted more with synthetic data because you can control for, many more of the variables. What we just talked about in terms of the kids' mental health, that could also kind of go in like a psychology class, right? And we even have like, counselors now that are AIs. So
mhm.
I'm wondering if there's a way, beyond kind of understanding AI and integrating AI and working with the students to show how it's not a replacement. Like, how do you recommend, teachers like keep up with like just all the changes that are happening in their fields?
Mhm. Well, I feel like, of course, you and I think both live in this AI bubble,
Right.
and we're totally consumed with it. And I just don't think that the average teacher needs to try to keep up with the level that we do. But I do feel like, maybe joining some PLCs that specific to their content area, their age, that are led by someone who can keep up with it and just kind of disseminates the information as much as needed. I mean, I can't go to a school and share everything I know about AI, or everybody's going to walk around bewildered, and so they don't need that level. But they do need to know how it affects their field and have some discussions that are relevant to their field. And so I personally feel like that, in schools, of course, we have a lot of people have digital learning facilitators or digital, they've got different names, digital learning leaders. I think those people are the ones that are kind of the most likely to be able to kind of break it down and vet it and share enough not to overwhelm people, but to be helpful to them. But unfortunately, we're seeing with the Esser Cliff and all of that, that some of those jobs are not being replaced and they're being reduced instead of increased. And so I would love to see some funding and some legislation from our state and from others that are actually ensuring that we have people on staff who are capable of being that person. But in the absence of that, perhaps in schools, there could just be some, they're going to be natural leaders who are going to be more invested in keeping up with it, that maybe they could step up and get some stipends to help kind of break it down and disseminate the information to others and lead some PLC groups or something. But human capacity is always the issue. And so that's one thing that we're trying to mitigate as best we can in our agency, because there are 8 people who have a position like I do, and then we have 3 called innovative learning catalysts, and we try to do as much as we can but we have thousands of schools, and even with 11 of us, um,
Right.
and so human capacity is going to be, but building up leaders, that's one reason why we're doing like our collaboratives, to try to build up some leaders in the school systems that can kind of step up and become that person for them.
So
Mhm.
one last question, and this might just kind of be a way to, I'll kind of think about it at the higher level, but kind of also package things together a little bit. There's this idea of kind of a moonshot, which I wrote about with Saba. I saw Amanda did like a podcast type thing where she has some different people to say, oh, like, what's your moonshot, for like education. One of the former founders of Google, Eric Schmidt, the other couple of weeks ago, he wrote a thing in the MIT review, and he said, "Well, we need a moonshot," and he was talking more about it, the defense industry level, in terms of what kind of needed to happen with AI. But like, what is your kind of like, if you had the power, like if you were they said, "Well, Vera, you're going to come here, you're going to work in the White House, you're going to be in charge of AI and education, and we're going to give you kind of an infinite budget, and you're going to help like all the schools in America adapt to this new industrial era." What would you do? Like, what were some of the the core things you think need to happen?
Okay, well, for me, I would first of all, I would mandate AI literacy throughout all curriculum areas and all grade levels, and we would have something laid out by grade level that was easy to use. Like teachers had lessons they could actually use and infuse into the curriculum. So that would be number one. Well, teachers and students. Um, but then the second one is that I would mandate that in the high school levels that they do have a continuum of use where students are actually getting to use it and really, of course, in a continuum, not they don't start with using it at the AI empowered level, but they start with actually learning about it, learning to use it as an assistant. Then they're integrating it into their work in the way that is most like what we do in our daily lives. And then they're actually getting an opportunity to do some really powerful, PBL type project-based learning with it, and every student across the board, and that the schools are then, that's going to require the schools to change how they work in general. And I feel like standardized testing is one thing that really holds us back in this regard. And so I would revamp the whole standardized testing program, so that it is not dictating so much of what students are learning. I feel like learning the basics in elementary is really important, but it really holds teachers back because their evaluations are based on it. It puts a lot of downward pressure on students, and their mental health is affected by it. And so I would revamp the whole system so that students have a career and college readiness, like a portfolio as their assessment in high school, that they begin, even in middle school, is kind of thinking through, but they would have a portfolio where they're actually exploring different careers. And of course, AI would have a big part in that, where they're displaying their work and their level of integration. But this is a project that we actually started. Dr. Jeremy Gibbs, who's now our state deputy superintendent, used to be in my own district that I worked in. He was and I can't remember his exact title, but basically he led the curriculum. And he and I together had started a program like that to kind of phase out the old senior projects that were outdated. And we had a program set up before the pandemic, and we were starting to roll with it. But then after the pandemic, they just kind of did not reinstitute it. But I think to really prepare students for the workforce, that's something that needs to be reinstituted, and they work through it all the way through high school. And then at the end of high school, they have something that they can submit to a college for admissions. They can submit it to a company for a job, and it has, work samples from them. It shows where they've, showed growth over over the high school years. And so I think we need to revamp education from the top down and the bottom up, with more of a workforce readiness mindset, and that would include a whole lot more project-based learning than what we have now. And I'm sorry that I cannot remember his name, and you probably know him, but there's a guy on LinkedIn who's done a lot of work with AI and project-based development or project-based learning. And I think that would be my moonshot, that schools are set up more for that. that students are, and I think our students will be more engaged as well because they're going to be able to tap into their own interests and learn and develop their own critical thinking and their creativity, their collaboration skills, and all of those things that always come up in the job surveys from whether it's World Economic Forum, Microsoft, wherever. Those durable skills, like the ones that are in our portrait of the graduate, are the ones that companies want. They none of them say, "I want them to make such and such level on a test anymore." I mean, and so those durable skills, we really need to focus more on those. And I think our superintendent's done a really good job of that in North Carolina, State Superintendent Truitt. I would like to see that from the federal level down, and all the state levels down.
Yeah, so it's really, kind of in kind of infusing AI, infusing learning about AI, but also so like instructional redesign that engages the students more, kind of leads, lets them produce things that they can say, I worked on this. This is what I did, maybe individually. This is what I did as part of a group. You can see what I've done. Because of course, yeah, when you go to a job interview, even if you're, maybe 20, they're going to ask you about something you've done, right? And they're
Yeah.
not expecting you to have done something that maybe when you're applying
Yeah.
for a job, when you're a decade older, right? Or you've been in, right, the workforce for 10 years, but everybody wants to see what you can do. If you can
Yeah.
do certain things, then you probably have some of those academic and social skills that you're going to need to be successful. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you very much for this. It was very, both eye opening and to hear like all the details of what you went through to kind of, to build up the guidelines and then start to work with the schools, because it does have to be diffused, right? Not only to the education agencies, but like into the school systems, into the schools. I didn't even ask you, like, do you know how many schools there are in North Carolina?
We're around 2,300, but I don't know the exact number because we'll have some new charter schools on July
Right.
1st
Wow.
added.
Wow.
And then
Yeah, so
some
over 2,000 schools, right?
yeah.
That this is all new to everybody, and one difference, of course, it's coming very, very quickly. Computers, and especially in terms of kind of how useful they were, grew a little bit over time. I started with the Atari and the Commodore 64. There's only so much you could do with that at school, right?
Mhm.
Then you had the Apples, and then people learned a little bit as they went, and the technology became more useful in schools, and it became more important for students to know about it. This is
Yeah.
all just incredible capabilities being diffused through all the devices that we
Hmm.
have, like really, really quickly, kind of really impacting the workforce, and the schools. The schools can't avoid it. It's impacting their instruction.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that piece of disseminating the information, of course, is a challenge. And I have some ideas that I'm hoping to get funded with like a train the trainer model, where we'll pull, people from every district and do a train the trainer model with them, and they'll go back and train in their own districts as a way to help with that as well. But that's still kind of in progress. It's a proposal that I have that I'm hoping to get passed. But a lot of funding involved with that whenever you pull teachers and people out of schools and bring them to a central location. And then of course, so we're hoping that will get passed. But again, I feel like it needs to be now. I feel like it needs to be for the 24-25 school year. And we need to be targeting our secondary students this year.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, part of that, like, you don't even think of, all the logistics. I was talking to someone in Oklahoma who's a consultant, but, is a really involved consultant, almost at a full-time job. And he said, well, one of the hurdles we're facing is that in a lot of the districts, the teachers can only do so much professional development a year, or at least it can only be required. So even if we literally came in and we took over all their professional development time, we would really be able to kind of communicate kind of a fraction of the knowledge that they need. So, there's a lot of just logistics, like you say, whether it's pulling teachers out of school, whether it's taking that, say, into school, maybe they have 3 like professional development days during the year, but the kids don't have school. How much of that time are you going to use? You
Mhm.
can make materials available online, but then,
Yeah.
they have to make sure that they're going through and using them. You're only going to get probably the more proactive teachers. Nobody's really there with them if they have a question, right, to understand it. So there's all these just kind of real world kind of practical challenges communicating a change of kind of this magnitude.
Yeah, there's so much that is pulling at their time, like their professional development days at the beginning of the year. I mean, there's so much like legislation and things like that that they're having to address, and you know, with leadership changes, and it's very hard to get the time that you need. And this is something that can't just be a one and done. It's
Right.
really needs to
It's
be
not how,
job
well, this is
edited.
how you use your iPad. You can go use your iPad, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
a lot of the different technologies, AI is a lot of different things, and it has a lot of different applications. And I think that's one of the things that's hard about it, right? I mean, it's intelligence, and schools are largely about intelligence. So when
yeah.
people say, well, how could I use this? I say, well, you could, at a broad level, you can use it for everything you use intelligence for, right?
Mm,
Which is a lot of stuff that like happens in a school. It impacts every subject, every class.
mm,
It impacts how teachers teach, how students learn, and so there's only things do take time, but I love your kind of energy and your push. Yes, we need to get this in, at least at the high school level, at least maybe to like juniors and seniors, are going to be kind of applying to college, like entering the workforce. They really need some like immediate support, and especially when you consider lenses of equity, there are a lot of students who are not going to be able to gain access to this technology, and more importantly, like learn how to use it properly unless it's at their public school.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's what keeps me up at night. Trying
Right.
to make sure those
Because you
students.
see students like they're going to get left out. One of the first things that hit me, and as working in debate, it's just kind of the way this works. It's not always the case, but it's a lot of kind of like you're more like kind of academically. I'll use the word kind of advanced students that are graduating at the top of their class, and even before AI, those kids would have tutors, and you saw that maybe over the last 5 or 6 years. They'd say, "Well, I can't come to debate practice. I have my online class." Tonight they were taking online classes. They had tutors, which really became online like after the pandemic. They're already taking advantage of those types of things now.
Mhm,
On their phone or their iPad or their laptop, which a lot of those students like have their own without any school restrictions, right? On the technology, as you said, they can really learn anything they want. Maybe it's going to hallucinate a little bit, but they're 95% ahead. They can really learn anything, and the gap between those students who are already learning more now can learn anything, have the technology to learn anything,
mm,
have kind of already kind of have that drive to learn anything. That
mm,
gap between them and the students who maybe can't access technology because it's restricted on their device, who even if they can access it, don't know how to use it, right? And you
mm.
haven't been pushed to kind of really kind of develop themselves in a way that maybe some of the other students have. The gaps we already see in society are just going to become astronomical.
Yeah, I really like the way the National Technology Plan framed that last year. It wasn't specifically about AI, but very relevant about the three divides. I mean, the access is only one part of the puzzle. We've got to make sure that the design divide is making sure the teachers get good quality, ongoing professional development, and that the use divide, that students get the opportunities to use it. And so we've got to address all three of those. We've done a lot on the access divide, but we haven't conquered it yet. We've
Right, right.
got those other two
The
divides.
pandemic kind of forced the solving that problem a little bit, but you're
Yeah.
right, it hasn't been it hasn't been completely solved. And some of those things are beyond school. Some of those are kind of
Yeah.
network access and where the networks are located, especially when you move
I
more
know in
into the rural area.
my
Sorry.
area, we have lots of people who are basically like on dial-up still, if they
Oh
have
wow.
internet at all. And in those same areas, don't have cell phone coverage. And so sending home a hotspot or whatever doesn't work either. But I mean, we did a lot. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still progress there as well. But the design and the use divides are the ones that I feel like we really need to be targeting, with AI literacy.